Right. Here we are, section 3 of 4 sections of the urinary system lecture. Hopefully you're in a good place where anatomy is concerned because we're moving on to the physiology. When we think about why we produce urine, the whole purpose is to maintain homeostasis. And we do this through the regulation of the volume and the composition of blood. And this is going to include the excretion of waste that we make. These metabolic waste include urea, creatine, and uric acid. So urea is made due to a breakdown of amino acids. That's what the two little A's stand for. Creatine is made due to the breakdown of creatine kinase. And this is necessary for muscle contraction. And uric acid, the waste uric acid, is formed because we are recycling our bases of A's, T's, G's, C's, and U's. These waste products are going to be in our bloodstream, and the only way that we can get rid of them is when they're dissolved and eliminated in urine. But in order to do this, we also have water loss. You know that sometimes your urine is more concentrated than others. Depends on your water intake and your water needs. So concentrated urine is concentrated 4 times that we find for plasma. So I want you to look at this table and look at the differences. It's not anything you have to memorize, but this drives the point home about the differences between urine and plasma and the fact that you are getting rid of waste. So the first column is urine, the second column is plasma. So if you'll notice, the sodium is about equal and the potassium is not. You get rid of a lot of potassium in urine and you retain it in plasma. Chloride, you get rid of a lot of that in urine. And then bicarbonate, you don't have as much available in the urine of a person who is in homeostasis. But I want you to look at your plasma levels of glucose and your and your urine levels of glucose. Notice that you should have a very, very small amount. This is in milligrams per deciliter. So your blood plasma level should be about 90 for a person who's in homeostasis. You should have very little in your urine. Notice the same for lipids, the same for amino acids, but look here at proteins. You shouldn't have any in your urine. But then when we get to the nitrogenous waste, look at this large number. Well, I clicked too soon, but you can go back and look at the large amount of waste to include urea and creatine. All right, so how do we make urine? There are 3 steps to the making of urine, and we're going to start with the first step at the renal corpuscle. And this is where we have filtration. So it's hydrostatic pressure based on your blood pressure that is going to force water through the membrane pores of the capillaries. And so the larger solutes and other materials are going to be retained. So we know this occurs across our capillary walls, and we have water and dissolved materials that are pushed into the interstitial fluids. In some places in your liver, the pores are large, and you can actually have plasma proteins that enter the interstitial fluids. But at the renal corpuscle, it's different because these membranes are very special and they stop or restrict all of the circulating proteins. So once we have filtration, then we have reabsorption and secretion. So when we get to the level of the kidney, the different types of transport that we have include diffusion, osmosis, and channel-mediated diffusion and carrier-mediated transport. Right, so remember what diffusion is. It's passive. You're moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Remember, osmosis is the movement of water across the semi-permeable membrane from an area of low concentration of the solute to an area of higher concentration of the solute. Both diffusion and osmosis have the goal of maintaining balance, or reaching balance and then maintaining balance. Channel-mediated diffusion, it's specific channels are used, there's no energy, it is concentration dependent because it is diffusion. And then we have carrier-mediated transport. So remember those when we looked at transport: facilitated diffusion and active transport with co-transport and counter-transport. Remember, with facilitated diffusion, you have these carrier proteins that don't use energy. They follow the concentration gradient, but they're going to carry substances across the cell membrane. Then when we get to active transport, we know that this takes energy. It can either be with or against the concentration gradient. It uses energy. You can have carrier proteins or exchange pumps, like the sodium-potassium pump. One form of active transport is secondary active transport. And then we have co-transport, remember, where we move two things in the same direction simultaneously, ions or molecules, follows the concentration gradient. And then counter-transport, where we have one substance moving one direction, one moves the other direction. So again, it's two, whether it's ions or molecules, and one is maybe moving in a cell and the other is moving outside of the cell. So remembering this carrier-mediated transport, it's specific. You have a specific substance that binds to a carrier protein, typically only works in one direction. Where you find the carrier proteins is going to differ on the cell surface. They're not going to be evenly distributed. If we look at tubular cells, they have many types of carrier proteins, and carrier proteins can be overwhelmed. They're like enzymes. So if you think about why you have too much glucose in your urine, it's because you have so much glucose in your blood that it just overwhelms the system and it shows up in your urine. All right. Another concept that we have to think about is called the transport maximum. So if you have a concentration that is higher than the transport maximum, then it exceeds the resorptive abilities of the nephron. Think glucose. You can't kick it all out and put it back into your body. So some material, such as glucose, will remain in the tubular fluid and then it shows up in urine. This transport maximum determines this threshold level. This is the plasma concentration at which a specific compound or ion or substance begins to appear in the urine. Again, thinking about glucose, there is a threshold level. So for glucose, it's approximately 180 milligrams per deciliter. That's the renal threshold. So a person who is in homeostasis for glucose will be somewhere between 90 and 150 milligrams per deciliter. However, if you just ate 3 cupcakes, you're going to be way above that. If you don't have diabetes, your body will be able to manage this over time and you'll get down to your 90 to 150 milligrams per deciliter. But a person who has diabetes, they would have great difficulty managing those 3 cupcakes, right? So regardless of whether they're diabetic or not, you eat 3 cupcakes, you're going to have glucose show up in your urine, right? So you've exceeded the transport maximum, and this is called glycosuria, right? The appearance of glucose in urine. So for amino acids, it's about 65 milligrams per deciliter. So if you ate that 32-ounce steak, you've had this protein-rich meal, you're going to have a very high number of, or amount of amino acids in your urine. And that is called amino aciduria. It's the appearance of amino acids in urine. Aldosterone is a hormone that is produced by the adrenal cortex. So let's go to the very beginning where I showed you the kidneys, and I said on top of each kidney is a pyramid or pyramid-shaped glands. And these are your adrenal glands. Well, the outer edge of that gland is called the cortex, so the adrenal cortex. And aldosterone is produced in the adrenal cortex, and it reduces the amount of sodium that is lost in urine. So the presence of aldosterone helps you retain sodium. There is a disorder that is called hypokalemia, and this is produced by prolonged aldosterone stimulation. So if you have prolonged aldosterone stimulation, then you are going to have more sodium present in your body. The more sodium you have present in your body is going to reduce the amount of potassium in your body. So aldosterone, prolonged aldosterone stimulation reduces the amount of potassium that you have in your plasma. We have something that are called natriuretic peptides, and they do the opposite of what aldosterone does. So it increases the amount of sodium lost in urine. Your parathyroid glands produce parathyroid hormone. Remember where your thyroid is in your neck. Your parathyroids are the 4 tiny little glands that are about the size of English peas. There's 2 on each side, and they will assist with regulating reabsorption of calcium, right? And calcitrol, vitamin D, does the same, right? And that's supposed to be kidneys, not kidney. Sorry. Acidosis. You can either have lactic acidosis after you have great muscle activity due to anaerobic respiration. Remember, we talked about the production of lactic acid. You can have acidic blood, higher acidity in your blood due to lactic acidosis, or you can have ketoacidosis, and this is due to the presence of ketones. So if a person is dieting, or they have diabetes, your body does not have enough glucose to sustain your metabolic activity, and you could go into a ketoacidic situation. Homeostasis in regard to blood pH is maintained either by having hydrogen ions or bicarbonates present, depending on what we need. Alkalosis means you have abnormally high pH. If you have too much aldosterone stimulation, you can go into an alkalosis situation. If you have a situation where your blood pH is acidic, then the proximal convoluted tubule and the distal convoluted tubule will actually deaminate the amino acids, which will engage and tie up those hydrogen ions, which will allow for the production of ammonium and carbonic acid. When that happens, bicarbonate ions will enter the bloodstream, and it will buffer the blood so that the pH can get back to homeostasis. Another hormone that is produced and is necessary for us to maintain homeostasis is antidiuretic hormone, ADH. So here's an easy way to remember it. It's a little simple, but I think it will help you. A diuretic makes you pee, right? It doesn't actually make you pee, it increases the amount of urine. But if you think of it that way, a diuretic makes you pee. An antidiuretic will make you not pee. Not exactly the same, but an antidiuretic lessens the amount of urine that is produced, right? So diuretics make you pee, antidiuretics make you not pee. So ADH, antidiuretic hormone, causes water channels to appear in your urine production system. So it increases the rate of osmotic water movement. So if you have high levels of ADH, right, a high amount of antidiuretic hormone, then you have a higher number of water channels that are open, and you will have a lesser amount of urine. If you don't have ADH present, then water is not reabsorbed and you will produce large amounts of dilute urine, right? This is a really important concept for you to grasp. Your hypothalamus is important in the production of ADH as it continuously secretes low levels of ADH. So if you are in homeostasis and you have normal ADH levels, then your collecting system is going to absorb close to 17,000 milliliters of fluid per day. A healthy adult should produce 1,200 milliliters of urine per day. Now, when you're thinking about someone who is on their feet for 12 hours, such as a nurse, they may try to limit their fluid because oftentimes they just can't even take a break to get to the restroom. So a healthy adult should produce about 1,200 milliliters of urine per day. If the person is diabetic and they're not well controlled, they will actually produce more urine than the 1,200 milliliters because their body is constantly trying to dilute the amount of glucose that is in their system, and your body is trying to make you pee it out, so you actually produce large amounts of dilute urine. So a diuretic is a drug that promotes water loss in urine. It's called diuresis. So a person who has high blood pressure may be put on a diuretic because it reduces blood volume and blood pressure and extracellular fluid volume. So oftentimes a person who has high blood pressure has edema, which is the swelling of the hands or feet, because they have great difficulty removing that extracellular fluid volume. So often they will be put on a diuretic. So urine has the composition that it does because of filtration and absorption and secretion at the level of the nephron. So urea is neither actively excreted nor absorbed along the nephron. It's going to pass into the filtrate at the renal corpuscle. Organic nutrients are completely reabsorbed, right? They're missed by the filtration process, such as creatine. The components of the tubular fluid, which will eventually will become urine, depends on the movement of water. So this is osmosis. Normal urine should be clear, sterile. The yellow color comes from urobilin, and that comes from the urobilinogens. If you go back to digestion, you remember where those come into play. I always get the question, can you drink your own urine? Well, if you're in a boat in the middle of the ocean and that's all you have, well, I guess you could. But when it leaves your body, if you are in homeostasis, it should be a clear, sterile solution. But every one of us knows what it's like when you have not had enough water and you've been drinking nothing but coffee. And your urine is not a clear solution. So that tells you that you are dehydrated when you produce that very dark yellowish brown or green urine. Okay, so this is the process that you need to know for the urinary system. Don't let this image frighten you. We talked all about these different parts and let's put them together, right? So I'm going to talk you through renal function. All right, the first step is with the glomerulus. I'm going to highlight what is the glomerulus in this image here in green. I also got the capsular space, and now I'm going to highlight the Bowman's capsule. All right, we're talking about the glomerulus at this point. So we know that the filtrate is produced here at the glomerulus, remembering that the glomerulus, the capsule space, and the Bowman's capsule all make up the renal corpuscle. The filtrate that is produced here has basically the same composition as blood plasma, but it does not have the plasma proteins in it. The proximal convoluted tubule starts right here, right where the renal corpuscle ends. And the proximal convoluted tubule in this image, many of the convolutions have been taken out, but it's indicated by this green line. So this is where we're going to remove ions and organic substrates. So I think this would be a good time for me to talk about the dots that you see and the numbers, right? All the way through here, you see this number, all the numbers and the dots. So when you're looking at the numbers, we're looking at concentrations, right? We're looking at concentrations of all of the different solutes. We're not separating them out. So notice what it is at the junction of the proximal convoluted tubule and the renal corpuscle right here. It says 300. So the number of dots represents the amount of solute in the solvent. It's the amount of it's the concentration of whatever is in the urine. So notice it stays 300. But as we get closer to the loop of Henle, notice water is leaving. Right close up here to the, closer to the renal corpuscle, we've lost nutrients. And I shouldn't say we've lost them, that sends a negative, but it's things that ended up in the filtrate that didn't need to be in the filtrate. And so they are diffused out at this point. So when we look at these numbers and we look at these dots, notice what happens to the numbers. So there's, let's say, 300 parts per million, 600 parts per million, 900 parts per million. And as we continue on down through the loop of Henle, look at that concentration of 1,200 parts per million, right? Because notice what we're losing. We're losing water. We continue to lose water. Then, when we get to the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, look what we're losing, sodium and chloride. So the concentration level will begin to decrease again. And as we get up to the distal convoluted tubule, see where we're at. We're only at a concentration of 100. And if you want to call it 100 parts per million or whatever, it's 100 milliosmoles per liter, whatever the concentration is. And then as we go through the distal convoluted tubule, notice we could be losing water. Because of aldosterone, we're losing sodium and gaining gaining potassium. We could be losing more water. Notice the dotted H2Os. As we continue down through the collecting ducts here, notice that we begin to concentrate again. So if we started at 100 to 300 parts per million, as we continue down through the conducting tubules, we're again concentrating because we could very possibly be losing water. right? So that when we actually have urine formed and it is eliminated, we're at about 1,200 milliosmoles per liter or parts per million or whatever the concentration is. So you can just follow the dots and see how the concentration efforts occur. So that's something to keep in mind as we move through this process. All right, so at the proximal convoluted tubule, you can see that it produces osmotic water flow. You can see right here out of the tubular fluid. It reduces the volume of the filtrate. So we have a higher concentration, but we have less fluid. And this process also keeps the solutions that are inside of the tube and outside of the tube, keeps the solutions inside and outside isotonic. When we look at the PCT in the descending limb, this is what we're looking at here. The water moves into the peritubular fluids. So the water leaves the renal tubes and then enters the peritubular vessels. And it makes the concentration of the renal tubules much higher. And it's reducing the volume because we are losing water. When we get to the thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle, you can see that sodium and chloride are actively transported out of the cells. All right, so this is a co-transport situation where you're losing both of them. And you can't see it in this picture, but urea, the waste, becomes a higher proportion of the osmotic concentration. When we get to the distal convoluted tubules and the collecting ducts that you're seeing here, the final adjustments are being made in the tubular fluid, right? So water could be leaving because of aldosterone, sodium is coming out, potassium is coming in. So the osmotic concentration is adjusted through active transport, either reabsorption or secretion. So you can see the water coming out. When we get to step 6, where we have the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts, this is the later portion, you can see that final adjustments are being made. We have antidiuretic hormone that is regulating the permeability where we could possibly be losing water, and it's making those final adjustments. And it's the ADH that's going to determine what the final urine concentration is. So now we get to the vasa recta. Remember, the vasa recta is the part of the peritubular capillaries that actually go around the loop of Henle. So it's really okay to use them interchangeably. You just know that these are the capillaries that surround the nephron and the collecting tubes. So their job is to absorb the substances that have been released, and it maintains the concentration gradient that is necessary for homeostasis in the medulla.